wherever you are watching us from. This is QTV, and I am Omar P. Jallo. I'll be taking you through this 1 hour program of the National Environment Agency Hour. And I have very important guests in the studio, and they are going. I will give the floor to them, or I will introduce them by name before we talk on the topic of discussion today. And the gentlemen in the studio with me are Mr. Cherno Jallo on my far right. Mr. Cherno Jallo is from the Ministry of Health. And I also have Mr. Bai Bite from the, Mr. Bai Bite is a pesticides and hazardous and chemical unit from the Ministry of the National Environment Agency, rather. Welcome to the program, Mr. Bite. And also on my left, you have Mr. Lamin Jaite. Mr. Lamin Jaite is also from a program officer from the same National Environment Agency. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Viewers, in the next 1 hour, we'll be looking at the sound use of chemicals for healthier environment. But before that, we will go with a short video of the topic that will actually open doors for discussions. We first go with the short video, and when we return, we continue with the program.
Bana jërëjëf waay sëñ bi na nga def
waaw ku baax
mbaa yaa ngi ci jàmm
nakam na nga def waay
maa ngi nii rek
mbaa yaa ngi ci jàmm
waaw alhamdulilah
man de saa yi dama doon garab goo xamante ni nii pour mbóot la ak matt
waaw
ndax dañ ma sonal lool waaw ak garab bi nga xamante ni xam nga sama kër ma nga fa am ay mandarine orange garab
mooy kii rab yu sew yooyu di topp garab yooyu
waaw kay
sa waay egsi nga xam nga lu ma lay yëgal mooy gis nga yi ma amee fii boo ci jan rek am nga bu baax te bu koy jege rek muy faatu waaye nag man di ma am comme maanaam man di ma garaaw
kon mun naa ne daal sama aajo faju na
dama garaaw de dama yokk cere dolli ñeex gis nga garab yi ngay gis ni mun naa koo defee beneen stratégie boo xam dama koy mix
yow say bopp
mu gën a gaaw gën a tàng gën a saf boo demee suma kër maa ngi fa amee loo xam ne moom laa koy mixé di ko liggéey dama ciy liggéey lu bari di ko yóbbu ci àll bi ci luuma yi ci ruq-ruqaat yi koñ bi gars yi xam nañ ma de.
di ko jaay foofu.
lay la.
kon sëñ bi sama aajo faju na.
foofu laa rawee gars yi nag man damay mixé suma bopp. dama koy mix man di ci boole yeneen yu ci bokkul rek.
nga baal ma de.
waaw.
maa ngi tudd
Mr. Mr. Dieng.
waaw
Dieng. Dieng yaa ngi ci jàmm. alhamdulilah. da ngaa bëggoon garab.
dama dégg xel ma ci dara si sa wax. wax nga ne.
waaw.
da ngay mixé sa bopp.
waaw xam nga boo gisee ma wax la loolu yenn saa yi nga gis ko yàkkamti koo xam ne wala nga gis mbóot wala matt yu dëgër bopp moo tax ma koy mix di ko safal ba nga xam ne dama koy mix ba bu jubee rab bi sax dafay dee ci saa si ba wow.
li muy jaay daa baax
ba gars yi tuddee ma bàyyi safal dama koy def ba di ko yóbbu ci luuma yeeg fu nekk. gars yi xam nañ ma di. am naa lan lay si.
waaw.
ah déet yow man affaire bi liggéey bi yàgg naa ci di loolu jarul lay si.
dëgg la yàgg nga ci waaye liggéey boo xam ne la foog nga amal ay si la nga koo def.
sa waay xam nga dee déglu doguma la xoolal xam nga nag maanaam mbir mi ñun xam nañ li ñuy def te gis nga li ma lay wax bay leen di dugg ci yëf yi jàmbur yaa ngi dégg jëndal wala nga romb nga dem ndànk man loolu laa xam de bu dul loolu nag loo fi jëlee nag yow la moo gën
suma carte ngi nii.
waaw
man ma la ko waxee woon rek maa ngi tudd Mr. Dieng maa ngi liggéey NEA. gis nga lii NEA mbootaay boo xam ne la mun na fi mu ngi teg mu indi act ak régulation boo xam ne mooy saytu wàllu chemicals yi ak pesticides control management and management di depuis 1999 ak 1994 parce que képp koo xam ne dafa jaay lii war naa am si parce que lii boo ko amut mën nañ si téye te suñ la si téye mën nañ laa daan fanweeri junni te buñ la caajee fanweeri junni boo ko amul wala nga am ko sax mën ngaa tëdd kaso ñetti at waaw lii loi bu gën a indi mooy act bi chemical and pest control management boo xam ne dafa am régulation léegi nag naa la bàyyi xëy na xamuloo ko woon waaye fexeel nga xam ko de uti ko sa wérgu la yaram la ñoo sàmm waaw ak kan koo jox tam wérgu yaram waaw fexeel nga def loolu
bokk na ci ba man mi koy jënd
yow mu koo jënd sax
yow jaayeeku ma la jërëjëf sëñ bi yal na la yàlla defal jàmm baax nga lool
baax na
jërëjëf waay
neexul ba neexul waaye góor gi li ma wax dëgg la kii wax na dëgg te kat loi bi nekkewu fi lenn lu dul rek aar ñu ñun ci suñu bopp ak suñu wérgu yaram kon képp koo xam ne yaa ngi def jëf ju mel nii na nga xam ne National Environment Agency dañ koy tere loi bi daf ko tere buñ la jàppee nag ba teg la loxo dinañ la daan xam ngeen waa ji ni mu ko fi waxee kon ne man bis ni ki tey bàyyi naa ko te dootuma ko def te ku ma gis nga koy def dinaa la yóbbu ci loi ñu jàpp la teg la ci yoon ndax loolu mooy tax réew mi avancé man ci lii laa nekk.
Welcome back from that after watching that short video. Gentlemen, we now look at the topic of discussion in detail, which is the sound use of chemicals for a healthier environment. May I start with Mr. Bai Bite from the National Environment Agency. Mr. Bite, what does this topic entails?
Yeah, thank you very much, Omar. Thank you, our viewers. What we're here to talk about today, it's about chemicals management per se. The theme of the discussion is sound use of chemicals for a healthier environment. As I always say, the environment is for all of us. If we live in a healthy environment, it means we're going to attain a healthy population. And if the population is healthy, we all know what that is going to lead for a country. You know, without a healthy population, nothing will work. If you see something working, it's that it is the people who are driving it, isn't it? If the people are not healthy, nothing works. And then we all know these chemicals. Chemicals are very important things in our livelihoods. We cannot live without them. They are very important. Even if you look at the clothes that I'm putting on, there are some chemicals in it. So that just tells that we cannot live without chemicals. But what we are advocating for is the sound and safe use of chemicals. If you look at the video that we just watched, it's citing on some regulations, some legislations. Why do we have some legislations to regulate the use of chemicals? Because chemicals are important, but they can be dangerous to us. So we bring in these legislations to control the use, the sale, you know, and so many other things regarding chemicals. Because we believe that if we have control over them, then we are going to reduce the risks that are associated with them. So legislations come in to reduce the risks of being exposed to chemicals, though exposure cannot be, I can say, cannot be removed at all, you know, but you can reduce it to the lowest level. So basically this is what this topic is, this discussion is all about. We come in to talk to the people so they would know how to use these chemicals, you know. That is all what we're going to talk about. And also we can say about the risk associated with them. That's why we have someone from the Ministry of Health to talk about what are the health impacts when someone is exposed to it. And also we have Mr. Jete here, who is also going to talk about the effects they're going to have on our environment. And then we also talk about the alternatives, because if you tell someone that this thing is bad, don't use it, you have to bring in alternatives. What is he going to use? So that is what this discussion is going to be centered today.
Thank you very much. We now move to Mr. Cherno Jallo from the Ministry of Health. Mr. Jallo, talk to us about the health implication of the misuse of chemicals. As he said, we must use chemicals because they are important for our survivals. Yeah. But there are health implications attached to the use of chemicals if they are not properly used. Yeah. What are those health implications?
Okay, thank you very much. As Mr. Bitte was saying, we cannot live without these pesticides, these chemicals actually, because we use them daily, and on our farm and in our households we use chemicals. But we need to manage them properly, otherwise we will expose ourselves or our young generations or young ones at home. That's why when you're having chemicals at your home, you should keep them safe. And when using them again, you need to be with your PPEs, personal protective equipment. You either put on gloves, you put on goggles and other things to protect yourself and the people coming close to this chemical. As is mentioned, using this chemical is a must. We're going to get rid of it to zero. We're going to get rid of this chemical because even at the Ministry of Health, we are using the chemicals on fumigating, and we've seen what was done during the COVID-19 pandemic. We were using chemical. But people who are going out to spray public places and others, we are putting on PPEs to protect themselves so that they will not be exposed. So there are two ways of exposing yourself to these chemicals, either direct exposure or indirect exposure. The direct exposure will be like you coming in contact with the chemical, either your body skin or something. Indirect exposure could be ingesting it, like eating it or swallowing it, which could be detrimental or harmful to human health. So we need to be very cautious when we are using this chemical. As Mr. Bitte mentioned, we're going to go away from this. We are still using them daily. At the Ministry of Health, we use them even fumigate during malaria pandemic when we are going out to fumigate households to prevent mosquitoes from entering the houses where we're sleeping. We use chemicals called before DDT, but now we've moved to another chemical because of resistance. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jallo. Now we move to Mr. Lamin Jaite from the Ministry of Environment. Mr. Jaite, you take us through the environment. What effects could the bad use of or the misuse of chemicals have on the environment as an environmentalist?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm actually coming from the National Environment Agency. What my colleagues have said, Mr. Bitte has introduced what the NEA does. NEA is a regulatory institution responsible for registration and control of chemicals. So when we say chemicals, we are actually talking more about management of chemicals, and this entails a lot of things. It entails control, distribution, and also sales of chemicals within the Gambia. So with regards to environmental aspects of chemicals, we will have to look at the different types of chemicals, classes of chemicals. In times of use, we have chemicals that are used for industrial use, and we have chemicals that are for plant protection products. Those are pesticides. And we have biocides. Biocides are the ones that we use in our households, like Chair said. And our focus here, is the ones that we use in our households and also in agricultural fields. Because in the agricultural fields, pesticides, we understand that, we all know that pesticides are intentionally meant to be applied. So during application, there are tendencies of exposures, and exposures can come as a result of runoffs events, drifts, after application of pesticides.
Thank you. Hold it there, Mr. Jaite. Yes, sorry for cutting you short, but we've just been joined by Mr. Alaji Gay from the Ministry of Agriculture. Mr. Gay, thanks for coming, and it's good to have you on the program. Mr. Gay is from the Ministry of Environment, and he will also be talking to us about the importance of chemicals in terms of agricultural productivity. How useful are these chemicals? But before that, we'll get back to Mr. Jaite to continue. You were talking on a very important...
we're talking about agricultural use of pesticides, plant protection products. So, because we were talking about the effects that they have in the environment, so it is important that we know the chemicals that we use in the agricultural fields, and then the pesticide that we use in our gardens, which is also very common in the Gambia. And this is where exposure is more predominant. And most of the women agricultural farmers, we understand that most of them don't know about chemicals or how to use chemicals or the types of chemicals that they use. So it is important that they know the kind of chemicals that they use and where they're buying their chemicals, whether those chemicals are registered, whether they are banned or whether they are restricted, they need to know. So when it comes to household use of pesticides, those we call them biocides, this is where we are having a lot of problems because a lot of agricultural pesticides are being used in the households as household pesticides, and this is where exposure is also predominant, where children are exposed to pesticides. People don't know how to use household pesticides, for example, biocides, and then the mode of application and even the formulations that they use in their households. This is important that people know that the chemicals, they need to differentiate chemicals that are meant for agricultural fields and chemicals that are meant specifically for household use. So we will dwell more onto it as we go.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jaite. Mr. Gay, you just joined in the program. You're from the Ministry of Agriculture. I'm sure you missed that part when your colleagues from the Environment and the Health Ministry did say that we cannot do without these chemicals because we need them on our daily activities, either on the farm or to use them at home. I'm sure, as an official from the Ministry of Agriculture, these chemicals must have very important role to play in terms of, doubling or in terms of productivity on our farms and in our gardens. What are some of those things that the chemicals can do, help us achieve in terms of productivity in agriculture?
Good evening, viewers. I'm Alaji Gay from the Plant Protection Services, Yundum. And like my counterparts have already said, pesticides play an important role in the management of pests and diseases. However, they can also pose unacceptable risk to human health and the environment. So as a result, pesticide risk management and risk reduction are very essential for the responsible use of pesticide. And the extensive use of pesticide has caused food contamination, and it also has caused environmental pollution, and as well it has caused destruction of what we call in agriculture beneficial insects. And like my colleague have said, a lot of problems have been linked to the use of pesticide. So as a result, the increased understanding and awareness of the adverse effects of pesticide to health, to human health and the environment is driving the need for an alternative to pesticide. So as a result, I am here today to discuss on the alternatives to pesticide. And one of the alternatives are the use of integrated pest management. And why do we say integrated pest management? Because IPM advocates and emphasizes the growth of a healthy crop with the least possible disruption to the agro ecosystem and allow and encourages natural pest control mechanisms to take place. And also, IPM programs in this country have demonstrated that, yes, it is true that we can significantly reduce the use of pesticide and without reducing crop yield and farmers' income. So, and as plant protection, we are working on a long-term IPM, strategies for the sustainable management of pests and diseases in this country, such as forecasting, the use of, crop rotation, and the use of, biological control options, and the use of resistant varieties, and the promotion of all the good agricultural practices, and of which the use of pesticide comes as the last resort. So, and we have an alternative that we want to discuss, and that is the use of botanicals. And botanicals, and we want to use botanical pesticides for that matter. Botanical pesticides are pesticides derived from plant parts, such as the roots, such as the leaves, such as the fruits, such as the flowers. And why do we want to use botanical pesticides? because one, we want to manage pest and disease. Two, we want to avoid using highly toxic pesticide. And also we want to avoid buying a very expensive pesticide. And we also want to avoid contamination and pollution. And equally, we want to be environmentally friendly. And we want to consume products safe from and free from pesticide residue. So this is why I am here today to discuss on the alternatives. And as we move in, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gay. We go back to Mr. Bite. Mr. Bite, you were talking on the alternative or the legislations that should govern the use of pesticides and chemicals. Take us through those legislations, because we wonder if there is any measures in place to control the sale, because we've seen as you're moving along our streets, you will be seeing people selling different things. Sometimes you will wonder whether all those people were licensed or they meet the criteria to be able to sell those things. Do they have the understanding? How do you register those people? How do you endorse them, give them license to sell those chemicals?
Okay. Thank you once again, Omar. As you said, yes, we have legislations that are governing the use, the sale, the distribution, the importation, the commercial application of these pesticides. As I said earlier, the overall, we can say the overarching legislation for chemicals and pesticides management in this country is what we call the Hazardous Chemicals and Pesticides Control and Management Act, 1994. This act was enacted in 1994. Okay. Under this act, there are two other regulations, which we call the Pesticides Licensing and Registration Regulations, and that's also what we call the Hazardous Chemicals Regulations. The Pesticides Licensing and Registration Regulations is strictly for pesticides control. The Hazardous Chemicals Regulations is for what we call hazardous chemicals, which are mainly used in industries. Those are industrial chemicals. Okay. So, to answer your question, before anyone is to engage in the business of pesticides, you need to get what we call a license. We have different types of license. There is a license called an importation license. That is, if someone is to import a pesticide, you need to get an importation license. If you are a retailer, like the ones you said, those that are selling one by one, the retailers, they also need to get a license. We call it a retail license. If you are a wholesaler, because sometimes you can just import and just be selling on wholesale, you also need to get a wholesale license. The reasons why we have this importation and wholesale. Not all importers are sellers. Farms do import. They are not selling, they use it in their farmlands. So you can import and you can also be selling. So in that case, you need both importation license and a wholesale license. If you are also doing a retailing, you need a retail license. If you are a commercial applicator, commercial applicators are those that go to houses to spray for them. Like sometimes you can have bed bugs in your house, you need someone to spray for you. You go and get a sprayer to come and spray for you. Those are what we call commercial applicators. They also need to get a license. We also have what we call a warehouse licensing, because you can have a store where you keep them, but there are certain requirements that the store needs to have before it can be allowed to be used as a storage for pesticides. That is what we call the warehouse licenses. Mm-hmm. So before anyone can engage in this business, you need to get those licenses, as I said. But how do you get that license? The license normally is it's issued by the National Environment Agency. What you need to do is you apply for a license, and in the application process, there is a form that you normally fill, and then you attach supporting documents. For example, one, we require your business registration certificate. And then if you have any knowledge on what you are going to sell, for example, if you are selling or if you are a commercial applicator, we require documentation to support that you have the required knowledge to engage in this business. Mm-hmm. So those are certain documents that we look for, and any other support, any other document that you think can support your application process. So those are some of the documents that we require. So once, what you do is you submit those documentations, then it is reviewed by the agency, because chemicals management is normally, for example, we have a multi-sectoral body that is overseeing this. We call it a Hazardous Chemicals and Pesticides Control and Management Board, which is composed of several directors from different institutions that have a stake in chemicals management. So what you do is you apply it to the board. So at the NEA, we have what we call the Hazardous Chemicals Program. So the Hazardous Chemical Program receive these applications on behalf of the board, review them, and then give advice to the board for board to approve, for the board to approve your application. So that is the process. So if we reviewed your documentation and we've seen that you are fit to do this, then that is the time that we recommend for you to be given a license. But as we said, there are so many people in the streets, and I can say more than 50% of them are not licensed.
I was coming to that, Mr. Bite, looking at the Gambia, the Badia or the Badim Fasa or Maslaha syndrome, it's affecting all sectors. This is not the use of or the sale of chemicals and pesticides.
Yeah, that is one of them. But you can see that most of these people that sell this in the streets are what we call them street vendors. Most of them are not stationed at workplace. And that is a challenge facing all over Africa. I've been to South Africa, and that is a challenge that they've said they're also facing. Street vendors are very difficult to control, because the thing is they don't have a specific place where you can find them. You go here today, you can find them there today. Tomorrow they are somewhere else. So it is very difficult to control them. But that should not stop us from going after them. And that is one thing that we have been doing, though it is very difficult, as I said. And one of my directors used to say, there is no market. There is no market. Sorry, there is no market if there is no buyer. If there is no buyer, you will not have a market. So I think the public also, as we are doing today, the awareness. I think some of the people that are buying from them doesn't really know or do not really know the health implications of the things that they are. What are the risks associated with what they are buying, and whether the persons that they are buying from are required to have certain documentations. I think if that awareness is created, now people can desist from buying from those. Because if I buy from you, I expect you to explain to me how to use this. What are the risks associated with this?
Exactly.
How am I to be protected?
Trying to link this to what we are seeing in our pharmacies.
Exactly.
Sometimes Mr. Bite will register a pharmacy. Will be issued a license to operate a pharmacy, and will employ or will have his younger brother running the pharmacy, whilst this younger brother doesn't have any idea, doesn't have any medical background, but he'll be the one to be administering drugs to patients, and this is possible to happen in your area as well. What is your agency doing in controlling such an act?
Actually what we do is we have an inspectorate unit at the agency that normally goes around to enforce these regulations. There's the pesticide licensing regulations. So normally what they do is when they go around, there are certain things that they looked at. That include the products that one is dealing with, whether the products are registered. Because products need to be registered. Registration is a must for any product that is to come into this country. Before, the registrations were done in the Gambia, but now it is done at a sub-regional level, at the ECOWAS level now. That's what is going to happen. So what you do is we look at the products that you are selling, whether they are registered. Registration is a must. That is the first thing they need to look at. If the products are registered, but whether the person that is selling it is a licensed authority, is a licensed person to engage in that business. That is one of the things. Whether the products you are using, whether they are banned products in it. Sometimes you can have products that were registered, and then later they can be banned,
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Bite. We move to Mr. Jallo. Mr. Jallo,
yes.
you were talking on the health implication chemicals could have if they are not properly used. You did talk about the direct and the indirect, health implication it could have on our health. Many people don't know that, or many of us think it is only dangerous when you consume them. When you swallow these chemicals. Maybe somebody from Bolibana or my village Saragainaka will wonder how does touching the chemicals with your bare hands affects you, or how does it affect you by just inhaling the scent of it. Is this possible to affect the health of an individual?
Actually, thank you, Mr. Omar. As I was saying, the chemical you'll be exposed in two ways, either direct or indirect exposure. The direct is coming in contact with it. Indirect is like inhalation or injection that's taken in to your gastric. But there are impact that is known at the moment that are short-term impact and long-term impact. The short-term impact of this chemical is upon consuming it or upon coming in contact with the chemical, you will see reaction. If that is direct exposure, you might see rashes on your skin, allergic reaction, and bruises. But if it is going to be like you ingest it indirectly, you will have diarrhea, vomiting, and other poisons, we say. But the long-term impact, you will not know. But when you are growing at long age, you will see the impact on it. It can lead, some of these chemicals can lead to cancers. It can lead to reproductive disorder. It can lead to neurological disorder and even bad defects. So that's why using this chemical, you need to be cautious. That's why all these chemicals, as Mr. Peter was saying, they are labeled and they are listed and they all have caution and the ingredient in it. So you go over it, read it properly. We all know the Gambia literature level is very low. But if you are buying this chemical, make sure you go by the PPEs and know what is the content in that chemical so that you can protect yourself and your people or your neighborhood actually. And make sure this chemical is kept safe. If at all, as Mr. Jade was saying, some are used for household, some are used for agricultural product or vegetable gardening and other things. So when you purchase this chemical, you have to manage it properly on your own. Keep it away from reach of children. It's very good. Don't change again labeling of your containers of chemicals. Don't remove a pesticide or chemical from its original container, put it in an Evian bottle or something. It can cause harm. Someone might just come and pick it. We all know some of these chemicals are either in powder form or liquid form. So gradual things, you will see people will come in contact with this. You will not know. Some of the impact are long-term, as I was saying. The long-term, as I was saying, that cancers, bad defect, neurological defect, and or reproductive defect. But the short-term effect, you will see it immediately. That is rashes, allergic reaction, vomiting, diarrhea, and even at long run, it can even cause death, which we are not looking for. You purchase this for your personal use, for your safety. You get rid of a pest. At the end, you get rid of a human being. Which we all know, some human are not, we call some people as pests, but we are not pests actually. The pests are the insects we are talking of. So we need to be very cautious when we are using this chemical.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jallo. Mr. Jaite, how does these chemicals, how can one know that our environment is being affected by chemicals, by the misuse of chemicals? Because one will wonder, a layman hearing, that chemicals can have implication or can be dangerous to the environment, will not understand. In a layman language, can you decodificate this for somebody from maybe, like I said, from my village listening to this program will wonder how can it affect the environment?
Yes, thank you very much. That's a very good question. So I will try to boil it down because the aspects of chemicals with the environment are a bit too technical. So there are so many parameters that you look into when it comes to chemicals. One of those parameters is the physiochemical properties of the chemical, because this is what dictates the fate of the chemical. Among those physiochemical properties that you need to look into, what we call, one of them is how much of that chemical could be accumulated into a system. A system, when I mean a system, is a human tissue or animal tissue. So one of those parameters is called the Octanal water partition coefficient, which is too much of a technical term, but it means how much of that chemical can bind to a tissue. So another parameter which is important that as environmentalists we look into is the organic carbon partition coefficient. Organic carbon partition coefficient is how much of that chemical can actually bind to soil organic matter. And this is important because if you have a very bad soil, for example a sandy soil, there is high tendency that if a chemical is exposed there, if there is a runoff, the chemical will leach. Leaching means the capillary movement of the chemical from the topsoil to the groundwater. And once these chemicals get to the groundwater becomes highly polluted. Surface water also could be polluted, and surface water is where we actually, our livelihoods depend on. People do fishing in surface water, sometimes drinking, sometimes even our animals also drink from this surface water. So when they are highly polluted, then indirectly, as he is saying, we also feed on these animals. And when we feed on these animals, this leads to what they call a biomagnification process, where a chemical is actually taken through because there are two types of you have biomagnification, where the chemical is actually being ingested, and then you have a bioconcentration, where the chemical is actually taken via drinking. So as a result, when it comes to the environmental effects, we also look at surrogate species. These are species that we use to determine how much of that chemical can cause an effect, because you cannot, in risk assessment, you cannot use human beings to test chemicals. So you use surrogate species. These are surrogate species, for example, like rats. So when you use surrogate species, the effects that they manifest, you extrapolate these effects to humans so that you'll be able to know the likelihood of this chemical actually causing a problem to humans. One of those problems, as he said, we have neurological problems that are associated with chemicals. We have bad defects that are also associated. And as he said, exposure could be in different forms. Exposure could be through inhalation. You can inhale a chemical. For example, sniper is a very common chemical that people usually use to control bed bugs. These chemicals can be highly toxic, and when you inhale them, that's when actually they cause problems to humans. You can also have a contact process where you can touch your skin and you can have a problem. There are some that work in a form of systemic way. They can enter your system and go to specific biomarkers in your body where they can cause problems. This is where I will stop for now and give chance.
Very well. Mr. Gay, let's look at how is it possible? Because one will wonder, then why do you need to use chemicals on our farms, on our gardens, if they can sometimes be dangerous to those crops, or even to our health as the consumers of those crops. If we have to use them, then we should believe they should not harm us in any way. Can you take us through how is it possible? Is it just applying it, or is it the over application of it, or under application, or how does these chemicals affect our crops or us directly by eating or using those crops?
Okay, like my colleagues have said, the inappropriate use of pesticides, can result in pesticide residue levels, in treated commodities, and that can represent a hazard to consumers, and that can also, constrain the marketability of products, both in domestic markets and in export markets. So for that reason, overdose application can cause a problem, and can cause something we call phytotoxicity, and underdose can cause something we call a resistant. Pesticide, pests can build resistance to pesticide due to underdose application of pesticides in managing pests and diseases. So that is very important. That is why we are saying inappropriate use. So this is why you need the technical know-how, you need the knowledge to know, how and when and where to, apply pesticide. So, but for the benefit of our audience at home and the botanical products that I came with, to showcase for their understanding, I would also like to speak in our local language.
Very well. I was coming to that. I wanted to start. I will want to start with Mr. Bitte to just say what you said in English. I'm sure that the people watching might be interested to hear. The Wolof speakers will be watching, and they will be interested to hear what is he saying in English. Mr. Bitte, take us through what you've said in Wolof.
Okay. Jërëjëf Omar. Comme niñ ko dee faral di waxee rek suñu waxtaani tey bi dañ ko indi pour waxtaan ak yéen si mbiri poson yu ñu doon jëfandikoo si suñ tool yi ak si kër yi soo waxee poson nag si tur bi poson ñi xam ne poson lu mu dee def mooy ida mu rey la wala mu isil la jànkuwante o jafe-jafe si sa wér-gu-yaram bu nga xam ne kenn xamut foo ko xam nga kenn xamut foo jëmee ak moom normally nag comme ni nga ko defee chemicals ak pesticides yi nii nekk na baat yu nga xam ne dafa jafe trop pour nga wax ko si olof waaye ñun normally si local language ni ñu ko dee waxee rek mooy poson lañ ko dee waxee poson yi bëri na façon am na ñoo poson yi janax yeeg poson yi matt ak poson yi mbóot ak bëri na façon daal waaye waxtaan bi yëpp si mbir poson yooyu noonu la parce que soo gisee nit ñi di jëfandikoo poson xëy na dafa am lu nga xam ne moo nekk seen kër yi lu nga xam ne moo dañoo sonal te xamuñ luñ mun a jëfandikoo pour tàggoo ak moom so option bu ñu am rek mooy dem jëndi poson suy ko si affaire yi wala su dee su ndox bi la ñu wis ko si lal bi wala fu mu mun di nekk pour tàggoo ak moom loolu moo leen si dee dugal waaye ñu si bëri xamuñ lu nekk si gannaaw poson boobu yan problème la lañ mun a jural si seen wér-gu-yaram ak si environnement bi mooy suñu wóoruwaay bi ñu si bëri da ngaa gis ne di ngay léeg-léeg nga gis ku nga xam ne dafa dem jël la poson mun naa jël comme sniper exemple sniper bi nekk na lu nga xam ne isi na problème yu bëri si dëkk bi ba loolu tax na sax sniper sax fu mu nekk ni si dëkk bi dañ ko ban am na lu ñëw moratorium nekkut comme permanent ban waaye dañ ko baanaangum te ban bi is xam nga amut délai kañ la ban bi di génne ba time bu ñu demee gis ne sniper bi is safe for use ñu soog koo mun a génne so lu waral ban bi mooy ay loraange yu nga xam ne daf ko jural si nit ñi ba am na ñu nga xam ne sax génn nañ àdduna te seen génn àdduna dañ ko méngale ak jëfandikoo sniper boobu noonu loolu bokk na si lu ko waral di nga gis na léegi-léeg ni dafay ñëw jël poson bi suy si lal bi rek les si suba bi nga ko def ngoon jot na fogas lal bi rek tëdd soo tëddee moom am na lu ndee ooyee half life si angale half life mooy time bu nga xam ne moom la mooy jël pour xaaji dose bi nga xam ne moom nga dose yi poson boobu noonu pour xaaj bi mu dem mu dégrade am na half life yi nga xam ne léegi mu daf day dem ay at wala half life di génn bala xaaj bi rek di dem so loolu su ful bi waree dem ba génn xam nga loolu lu bëri la
jërëjëf Mr Biteh ñu dem si soose Mr Jaiteh aɓe kummayala baake melɓe sirinswol kono fanan finanncé muna fan programme ola ngalo mo jama baji ɓe kam bari maybe dolbi je iman angale kango moy iɓe lafla ka moy i fangol la kangol to isa fo jiberlal ye yemmo fonum mandinka angale kango to isa sayin kan mandinka kango to
yo baraka so be men fo kan janga men fo angale kan siata lan ta be fo no la manika kan but be men fo la eni be men fo la men ka pudar wa fo ka wala nyinte ko aliya try nal be pudar wa fi aliena eni so al nyanta nal eni le pour ale kaytol soto pour falbe pudar wa fi no la fo ta wa fi no la so ni yaje ka kaytol di mol la wala ka mol control mo jelel be chemical wa fi no la ni melta wa fi no la so chemical ol keta kulete me an ko la mantoro warta len ke usele ante ila muna fawnen nta bono la kono but nyanta lo nambe chemical juma le use la ni mam nyana me use la secondly si même fono mole basically wala nyinti ko ya kordatio ni chemical o sang e nyanta lo ne chemical nyaadi le sang secondly ni be la so fanan kono kana chemical o kedula damde dinnewol beje bigon tara sata wol to le men yalan ko ngamol je e ka pudar wa fo ke ka pudar wol ta ke landi la bungol kono ni la dimbal ke laje dol fanan beje mena ko pudar wol landi la dinnewol ka sika e ka pudar wol domo e ka problem wol soto je so mbe même fola mole wala nyo pudaro keta fennete me alon ko dangerous tabakale pour hadamado so nalbe pudaro use la ala use nyala me alon ko man sakunda son tamen alial fan tanka anal yalla dimbal tanka because momo e kamen kela bon konet la lon so ni ko mole ko ka use le in the good way warda ni ta de la bon konet ka use nyama beta mantora ko me ka soto je yalla mantora ko nyi ita ni la dimbal del ka share so I say ke ko al chemical sifa nyaade le use mel fananka chemical wafo ko aleta national environment agency ale lansi no soto isaje ko alsi chemical sa long alka chemical nyaadi le use fo chemical o ni e bulla fidala ni banko sontala wala ni banko man songal
say mel ka pudarol wala o chemical ol wafi watara e man lansi no soto ale mung sartale landi pour nale wo sifal muta albe mun kelela
so mel yalan ko chemical wafo ko momo yalan ko chemical o ka wafi lansi no table alon ko be men ke ka man beda so ning NEA inspector ni benda sato kono wala police ol be jale melen ko NEA kafu nyomo soto ise samono luwa nyate nyandu ni tara luwa nyate nyala mol isu sorono le up to sanji saba luwa yo power deal wala ko dile kan ko do me an ko fa la business o masi so ni yalon ko kala ka pesticide o wa lansi no te blokon yata NEA National Environment Agency le Jimpex road le ni kada sere ko ndale plan kanifin le plan oto ena je ya ko mole ko lafta pesticide business o kala ngela kay do jibe nga jibe on fo la karam fon futa no tale pour ya poudar woni ya marano anin ka wafi
baraka bake Mr Jaite Mr Diallo musidɓe hettotoɓe laaroɓe QTV haalanaɓe rek ko haalnoɗa ko e pulaar ko hoɗum woni caɗeje ɗe ganduɗa wadde use ɗiɗo chemicals ji si en naftorani ɗi no fotirini ɗi wawi tagde ɗum jibinana en lorji e galleji meɗen e ɓesguji men walla e ndemanteri meɗen aɗa ɗum wawi haalande musidɓe fulɓe hettotoɓe laaroɓe
ok jarama Omar comme no wirɗani mi wawata haalde fof komi haalde english ko mi waɗa tawi ɗum e pular kono mi wawi wiide kala mo anɗa no gollire lekki ko anda walla ma ko gadin ma walla ko ngesa ma walla ko galle ma comme kullenate nder golle comme pay koy no ton mawɓe no ton kadi renɗa siɗa gollire ɗum saabu honɗum lekki ko naforoma falla ko nafuma itta ko lorratama nder galle ko kullu won ko ma lorto woni ɓoori woni daame ko sa gollire lekkel ɗen ko a foti renade hoorema danda hoorema danda ɓeygure ma sa gollire ɗum waɗu feere waɗa ɗum ko anɗa pay ko memata ɗum mawɗo ɗum wata henda ɗum hay kala sansan ko butel ɗum wonno ɗum acca butel muɗum renɗa kadi yettugol ɗum walla ko anɗa fo wawa hende lekki ko pour dandugol ma danda ɓeygure ma kono lekke sa gollire ɗum ko waɗa feere joƴƴina ɗum ko anɗa wata yewtide muɗum gollirɗa ɗum kadi anɗa hara sa gollire ɗum kadi waɗa feere watta hoorema glove ji ma lone ma goɗɗo ganduɗa hara wata ɗum ñamude ma wata mi waɗe ɓandu ma wattata ko anduɗa no timmi hara dandade hara heɓano probléme saabu honɗum lekkel nen waɗa cause probléme ji ɓoye nder ɓandu ma anata ɗum joni goɗɗum ko joni yiyata ɗum ɓandu ma ɗum feɗɗama woccoma goɗɗum waɗa kono si ɓooyoyi goɗɗo kadi donc ɓooyi andata waɗa cause cancer ñaw wenta cancer ma jibina ɓiɗɗo wonde ellama o timmani ina probére anda ko lekke on ɗa gollire nder galle ma ɗe waɗi ha heɓuɗa ɗum so
a jarama Mr Diallo e holla en time ko heddi ko juutani kono noon onon ardi ɗo e bagage ji goɗɗe a gentleman I saw Mr Bite coming into the studio with something. Mr Bite, what were you holding on your hand?
What I was holding, or what I'm holding right now, this is a sample of a pesticide. It is a herbicide. When we say herbicides, they are pesticides. They are pesticides, but they are not meant for control of insects. Herbicides are what we use to control weeds. Weeds are unwanted grasses in our farmland. So herbicides are meant for the control of certain weeds. So the reason why we brought this is to show the label. The label is very important in a pesticide product. As one of our officers, one of my bosses used to say, this is the ID card of a pesticide product. The label gives a lot of information on how to use, how you protect yourself, what is the active ingredient, whether it is registered, whether it is registered, its expiry dates, what precautionary measures you need to take. So these labels are approved during registration of a product. So that is why we usually say, though pesticides are not safe, but one that is registered, know that all the risks have been factored into its registration. And to use one that is registered is safer than to use one that is not registered.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gay, take us through what you also came with.
Comme mbaligol mi yalan ko atele ben jube kan so ko nyen tembona nata dun jambi pour ka kachake chemical la min kada pasino to mi yalan ko kam muna fam wala na suwol ko anin na kolto na kumkolto so kamala ko min kachake ta nyamen aliya moy ko mantora jama bi je mi yalan ko abe dendi chemical o min kada pasino la doku nyato anin ala muna famoto so kamala nin ko pasino ka mantoro le babala wala bari nañol mi yalan ko kana dun nako doko ko no sainteng wol bi ngin karo kala sainte ni rafta pasino busilam bulu sabe mun dilan na ba mun kala sa en wala atinna ntol agriculture bunda mi yalan ko dol la marta ka fife ngol take tanka sa nga mantoro jama fo ko pasino ka wala ke so bari sain nada fanan pour ka fero do fanan bonde fero mi yalan ko so muna fanno wo fero la pour kam fantanka eno mantoro la mi yalan ko wala pasino bala andum bi ning fengol min nata jambi kilum fele nyemu yiri kuna jambolti yiri kuna jambo le fengol mi yalan ko be ngala kun yalon ne so andu nañol jamabe je mi yalan ko katara na ko to ye kulon ala koto so nyiri kuna jambo fenne mi yalan ko se fa muna fanno wala pour que tumbol ta ke kele anin kuran kesol mi yalan ko wala kan fi fe ngol ta ke mantora sa intérieur ke be nyumbe muna fanno la nyina nyamen do fana be jam min kata e mentalati jambo fananti wo fana mu kulde fana mu yirma fe ngol te mi yalan ko fana ko ma tan se muna fanno wala pour que tumbol ni kuran kasolta ke kele anda si tumbol fana bayno na bambel to bambel balal
Mr. Gay abe kuma yala pour mol yalong iba use la nyaadi dabar ni ko ni be ise ni use no abe use la nyaadi
sa abe use la nyaadi mina wotole because wato dige sa be min kala wala nying ko min kabrin kisiro kata kuto nying yiri kunango jambo wala nyi mental jambo a kilo fula e wala tala ni wota ya tu wala ya kumundi wala ya fajindi ni ya fajindi ya bula ayela bar ni ba fajindi la fanan safuno fanan be jela mi yalan ko ingenta ka safuno ka fuji sa ngin sanku sala safuno ba kundula sidula nani sa en sudula kilo ngi wala tala yani yiri kunan jambo mi yemi fajindi yowol nyami ya bula ayela na yela somanda ya sonsong ni ya sonsong na tara kabri be nyin de la kanum litar fula yowala ta ya dela sa en somanda ni ya sonsong sa en litar se wala ka fula ja ke litar tandi ya ke la napsa ko kono wala pomperangol mi yalan ko wala bambu den ya spiri ila bambe kono tumbol mi yalan ko e gela fi fengol tinya ase fano le ba pare ase bayno la fanan kabu na bambelto
ando ate fi fengol to
andale fi fengol fanan tor la ba pare fanan nying abuka wafi adabe diaring imanta ko di bandele je ba pare man torati je mi yalan ko abe dending nying yirma fengo ke muna fangala
akuma yata bake Mr. Gay akum kacaji be diarim bari wato en jam fa janneto be men kala drone saying nga sari jiber la ila kuma la bamo
na kuma la bamo nyinde wolen komen ko komen nga
under 20 seconds
komen nga fo nyame rek wolen nga hakilo do pasino do fenne mi yalan ko mantora bale babala nimbe muna fanala fanan se fengol dum mi yalan ko wala ben tankala
baraka bake Mr. Gay Mr. Jaite
anta si men fono wala nyintu ko alsal comme ça nga men fono sina national environment agency ni men lafta ka dum poudre business o kono ani su kono kol fana al yal hakilo to poudre mal ke use nal be use la ali jam fandi jinde wala as much as possible al kana poudre use dinde wol be su kono musu kono mal fana se ke ku bi poudre fana amantoro warra musu kono mal fana na baka ani musol me be susun
baraka bake thank you very much viewers, that's all we have time for this program. It was a pleasure for having the gentlemen in the studio, and thank you for watching till we come your way next week. It's a bye from us.